Welcome everyone to this Living Lab lecture about large language models for bioimage analysis. My name is Robert and I'm a bioimage analyst. I analyze microscopy images together with biologists in their projects in order to answer biological questions. So you see here on the left, that's a microscopy image where the nuclei, for example, are shown in blue, and then on the right you see a segmented image where we have shown every nucleus in a different color. So that's one basic step of my job I do on a daily basis, more or less, and it turns out that with the recent development around ChatGPT, this can be automated. So you see here on the left a prompt, please segment the nuclei in the blue channel of this image. And what is seen on the right is actually done by ChatGPT. So my job can be automated with this large language model. And I would like to tell you a little bit about today how this technology can be used also for your science and also more general. ChatGPT can also explain what it's doing. So you see here a little text answer, and there's typically on the bottom also a button where you can see the code which was generated in order to analyze this image. So again, we will dive a little bit deeper into details. But for now, let's have a look about the technology which is around. So we are talking about generative artificial intelligence. Per definition, this is a type of artificial intelligence system which is capable of generating text, images, or other media in response to prompts. So it's commonly based on neural networks, and it bridges the two research fields, large natural language processing and computer vision. If you look, for example, what kind of things are done nowadays with these tools, you can quite easily, that's where the technology comes from, for example, use it for translating text. So you see here on the left a picture of a cat and a microscope, and on the right you see the German translation, ein Bild einer Katze oder einem Mikroskop. You can also take pretty much the same technology and feed in some noise, a noisy image, an image just consisting of noise, and a prompt, an English sentence, and it will generate an image of a cat sitting next to a microscope. That's very fascinating research field. And there's also the other way around what you can do. You can also put in an image and it will tell you with an English sentence what is in this image. So here it's a natural image of a cat, you may know, and the system can tell that there is a cat in a microscope in this particular image. So this technology is quite evolved, and I'm mostly focusing on how can this be used for microscopy. You see here again this image with these 4 cells with the nuclei in blue and an English prompt, how many cells are there, and on the right you see the segmented image and then a potential answer, there are 4 cells, I just marked their nuclei. It would be amazing if the technology would work like this. I think we are heading in this direction. I think for some special cases this already works, but that we can use it in biology on a daily basis is maybe a bit more involved. So let's have a look in more detail how this technology can be used. So again, this technology is great for translation tasks. So you see here a prompt, translate the following joke to German. What is every parent's favorite Christmas song? Silent Night. And it will easily translate this language to German. Was ist das Weihnachtslied aller Eltern? Stille Nacht. By the way, you can download these slides and you can reproduce the things we do here in these slides by clicking on the bottom of these slides on the link. So there are notebooks online, also with installation instructions, so you can reproduce what we are showing here on these slides. Then also a very common use case, not so often talked about, restructuring data. So large language models are quite good in taking data in one format, like text, a long text, and extracting information into a shorter text. So here the prompt is, given a story, please restructure the contained data. And the story is, the Compute Center of the university recently conducted a study to figure out needs of students for computational resources. After interviewing 100 students, they concluded that most of them were happy with 250 gigabytes of cloud storage. Restructure the story above to extract these numbers. Number of students asked and cloud storage size. And you see here on the bottom that it comes up with exactly that and puts the right numbers in. So if you think now you have 1000 emails from students who were mentioning some numbers and you would like to extract them with a language model, you can do this more or less fully automatically, also with high reliability. So that spares a lot of time. You do not have to read these emails and do this manual anymore. So for these kind of tasks, it's a great tool. There's also tools where it's not so good in. For example, querying knowledge, in particular for recent information. So, side note, I just moved from Dresden to Leipzig. And if you ask ChatGPT, what is Robert Haase at university, what is his research field? I couldn't find any information specific to Robert Haase from the University of Leipzig. It's possible that he might not be a prominent or well-known researcher in a specific field, or his information may not be easily accessible online. That's possible. Otherwise, if you ask for Robert Haase at TU Dresden in his research field, it will tell you that Robert Haase from TU Dresden is a researcher in the field of computer science and medical image analysis, which is almost right. So you see, it's not exactly good in this, and I also believe that it is not developed for this kind of science. It's not for this kind of question asking. It's not meant to be a replacement for Google. It has strengths in other fields. One more example of what it cannot do, and this is also softly related to counting nuclei in an image, for example. So you see here math. The prompt is, how many O's are there in Volumolu? And Volumolu, by the way, is a city in Australia. So it says that there are 6 O's in this word, and I would claim it's 8. And if you ask this language model a couple of times, it will also answer 5 or 7 from time to time, maybe sometimes 8. So it's not exactly good in counting things in given data. So if you, for example, give it now an image with 100 nuclei and would ask how many nuclei are there, there may be variation in the answer. It may not be a precise number of high quality. So in order to, we saw that also earlier, in order to get good results out of a language model, you have to provide quite some information. If you, for example, want to structure this information in a certain way, it's recommended to, for example, say at the very beginning, assign a role to the model. So how can we do this in a practical example? So I brought here this example. You are a professional academic consultant who gives advice to students for writing their thesis. And then I also provide some tasks of what kind of advice it should give. We'll not go into detail now, but again, you can read it in the notebook in very detail. So again, at the very beginning, I tell it you are a consultant, a professional one, and then I list some tasks of what kind of advice to give. And if you submit this task to ChatGPT, you will commonly get response like this, right? Long texts with a lot of lists, with a lot of blah blah. So this is what ChatGPT per default does. So a second thing we should do, we should also define the output style of the answer. We should specify more clearly what we expect from the language model. For example, if I say keep it short, it will do so. And it will then just provide these 3 advices, reformulate it a bit more professional than I was putting it there in the bullet point list. So that is important in order to get out of a language model what you are expecting. So we are tuning the prompt to be more precisely aiming at what we want to have from it. You can also, for example, define the output style by saying write like Yoda would, and it would do so. So, for example, from day 1, start writing your thesis, you must will then be the result of this language model. And you can also ask it to provide the advice in German, which is quite nice. If you, for example, have international students who speak different languages on your campus, you can, again, put these bullet point lists of what kind of advice to provide, and then you can ask it to translate it in a certain target language for assisting the students usefully. You can also use prompt engineering and like language models, large language models for producing images. We have seen that earlier, and there the same strategies apply. So if I ask, I would like to have an image of a cat sitting behind a microscope, it will provide some images of microscopes. By the way, no cats were hurt when making these images. But if I want to, for example, make it harder to detect which of these 4 cats might be real, I have to more precisely describe the image I want to have from the language model. And here you see now a more precise description, a more detailed prompt. I would like to have an image of a cat sitting behind a microscope. Both are on a brown floor in front of a white wall. The cat is mostly white and has some black dots. The cat sits straight. The cat is a bit larger than a microscope. If you provide hints like that in very detail, it will then also provide images which are much more similar than in the example shown before. So here also again, you have to engineer your prompt a little bit to get more precisely what you want to get out of it. You can also ask ChatGPT to do simple analysis, image analysis tasks. We have seen it at the very beginning. So here in this case, I asked the model, please write Python code and no additional explanatory text. Write a Python program that loads the file blobs.tif, label the objects in this image, and visualize the results. I also provide some additional hints, like assume this program would be executed in a Jupyter notebook, because I executed it in a Jupyter notebook, and it's not necessary to save the results, just show them. It will then produce code like this, and I can execute that code and I will see the result. And this is what I mean with a substantial part of my job has been automated. ChatGPT can do these kind of things. And if I make this prompt now a little bit more complicated, it's essentially the same task, but I additionally ask, please draw a mesh between the labels with a maximum distance of 50 pixels. I would like to investigate neighborhood relationships between these cells. ChatGPT is not capable of solving this particular task because there might not have been enough examples for this kind of analysis in the training data when ChatGPT was trained. So this will not work, but I can again provide more hints to the language model and say, for example, you are a professional Python programmer, you write Python code like a professional would, and I can also provide code snippets where you say, for example, in order to draw a mesh between objects, you can use this code example, and there's a one-liner basically doing this. And then the language model is capable of solving this task because it has this additional information given in the prompt. Just to put a little bit quantitative measurements on this kind of experiment I'm here performing, I was running this prompt 10 times, and when I executed it for the first time, there's an error message, doesn't work. But the second time already works. And then there are again 2 more executions with error messages, and then you see the result is varying. There's different code generated producing different results, which are very close. So you see again and again similar mesh structures drawn between neighboring labels because the segmentation was similar, and the mesh is drawn if it is similar with parameters which were similar. So if I executed this code, I executed this code 10 times, and it produced useful results in 5 out of the 10 cases, so which is already quite good. It's a 50-50 chance to get something useful out and not spending half a day reading documentation and figuring out how to do this myself. There were error messages in 4 out of these 10 runs. And keep in mind that ChatGPT, the technology we are using nowadays online, is like 2 years old, now projected 10 years in the future. So there is a huge potential over there. So we took basically, together with Christian Tischer from the EMBL in Heidelberg, we took this and put it into a Python library where you can just enter English text, like please load this image and show it. And now I will use it again and I will say, Bob, segment the image and show the result. And it will submit this prompt to the ChatGPT server. There will be code generated, and then we will see the result, and we can then play with the segmentation of this image interactively in a Jupyter notebook. We can also provide more complex tasks like I showed before when I was using ChatGPT on the online platform. We can also provide like English instructions like this, please load this image, segment it, and then apply some measurements and plot measurement of the area against the measurement of the parameter, and it will generate code in the background which does that, and it will show us the result. So this is pretty much an open source variant of what we have seen before on the ChatGPT website, with the advantage that we do not have to upload our data to the server of the American company. We can run this locally. But I'm also saying that the prompt which asks to generate code to analyze the specific data is still sent to the American server, so there is still some work to do in order to get these things run locally. Speaking of which, there's not just ChatGPT, there's also other algorithms, other tools, other models available for doing pretty much the same thing. So here you see a prompt, load blobstative, segment using Voronoi auto-labeling, which is an algorithm, and show the image and show the resulting label image. So that's the prompt, and I submitted it with ChatGPT, and there's some code below which would do that. Now I submit the same prompt to Gemini from Google, it's also a large language model with similar capabilities, and you will then just see, very general, it's the same, but here you will, for example, see that it uses variable names in and out, which is kind of prohibited for Python programmers, so for professional Python programmers would never do this. So there is some tiny differences between these different language models, in particular from the large vendors. They have similar capabilities, and I'm not sure if anybody ever measured if they are significantly in numbers different when you think about bioimage analysis tasks specifically. You can also use a server. You can also use a server which is provided by the Helmholtz Foundation. It's called BlaBlaDor, and it offers Mistral, for example, open source models. You can access that server for free if you are hired at a German academic institution, universities, Helmholtz members, and so on. You can also use tools like Olama to run these models locally on your computer if the computer has enough RAM, for example. But I'm also saying that many of the open source models do not seem as capable as the big commercial systems. So you can generate basic code, that's true, but if it comes to more advanced workflows with multiple processing steps and so on, these models struggle. They are not as far developed as the commercial ones yet. So I hope that this will also change with time. One more step in similar direction. Imagine we could now use an image as an input and not just a text, not just a prompt. So here, for example, I'm using ChatGPT 4 Vision, and I ask what is in this microscopy image, and the model answers. The image displays cells with nuclei stained in blue, actin filaments stained in green, and what are likely to be mitochondria stained in red. I'm not exactly sure about the last two, but I think the nuclei, at least in blue, that's correct. And we see here also that there is at least some biological knowledge and some microscopy knowledge in the ChatGPT model integrated through their training data, which is great. And maybe we just have to fine-tune a little bit existing models in order to really use the full power of this technology in our research. What else can you do with these multimodal large language models when you can consume and produce different kind of data? One important aspect might be image variation. So I take here this image and I can ask a language model to please produce another image which looks similar. And then I could use this similar looking image, for example, to test segmentation algorithms. So sometimes data is rare. We want to have more data of a similar kind, and we can apparently use language models to produce these different kinds of data. There's also a border here between science and art. So you can also, for example, take this technology and make the blobs image more cat-like. Again, if you want to try this out, there are links on the bottom of these slides where you can run this notebook on your own and you can make your microscopy image more cat-like. So new technologies also bring new risks. So if you can generate images, you can also generate parts of images. So in here I would say there's really interesting challenges for our community ahead. I spoke to an expert, Jan Procher, who is a bit in this field, exploring how to detect fraud in images, and it is not so easy to detect those things. It was already hard when these things were done manually by professionals, but now with the language models it's not super obvious how to identify the images which were manipulated like that. So there are interesting challenges ahead. Let's see how we can solve these problems in the future. Fascinating research field. So I spoke already a bit about data integrity, data safety. There's also an aspect I would like to highlight again. If you use ChatGPT, for example, to write emails to patients and tell them something about their diseases, and you ask ChatGPT to produce this email, please never ever submit any personal data of patients or related people and their diseases to ChatGPT, because this is transmitted to the server of a company and then might be stored there and further processed. So please keep data protection in mind. Do not submit anything to these language models which is like ethically questionable to do. Be careful with these kind of things. We also should think more about, or this open work field, about the computational costs of training neural networks. So the footprint, the CO2 footprint of when these models are produced and they are trained on hundreds or thousands of computers over months, that's really terrible, and we may end up at the point where half of the energy consumption on our planet is put into large language model training, and the question is if we really want to go there, or if we rather think about how to run these algorithms more efficiently. And there's also bias in these models. When I was trying that, here I was using Stable Diffusion, which is one algorithm of this category, and I was asking for a nice photo of a human. I was already surprised that half of them were male and half of them were female or looked female, but they are all white. So maybe we do not know yet completely how to completely reflect properly the human population when we generate images. So the training data obviously contains some bias, and that's why these models contain some bias too. Also, there's hallucinations in there. For example, if you ask for who developed Hadoop, I was asking this question in May 2023, and the answer pretty much was, yeah, Hadoop was developed at the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam, Germany, which is not correct. If you ask now in March 2024, it will correctly say that the database systems group at Leipzig University developed Hadoop. So apparently I think there was no white paper where the company said what they technically did, what they implemented here, but apparently they put some effort into having less hallucinations and more true information when people ask for facts of this kind. Also, one more aspect in this context. Imagine you are developers of language models, or if you are developers of code, because if there's a bug in your code, you can change the code, you will read the documentation how this function is supposed to be used, you will change your code, and then the bug will be gone. Your code will do the right thing afterwards. But if you have a language model which does not perform correctly, debugging that is much harder. It's not so easy to basically fix issues in language models. There's a lot more engineering necessary in order to make this happen. So also here, fascinating research field, fascinating future. So you see there's a lot of open challenges in the context of generative artificial intelligence, and I'm looking forward to working on those in the next years. And I would also like to point out some links to additional resources. So Digital Srini is a fantastic speaker in the online community, talks about anything image analysis related, a lot of Python programming tutorials, and also AI. He is planning really well in his YouTube channel, you should definitely check it out. There's also more videos about natural language processing in the ScaDS.AI YouTube channel. And if you want to learn a little bit more in detail how the language models work, also in the context of bioimage analysis, I also have another video online. Again, you can download these slides by clicking on the link below, and then you can click on these links. There's also some exercises in this slide deck, so feel free to use them. I will just quickly go over them. So you find, first of all, installation instructions and how to get Miniforge Conda on your computer. Then you have to also run some installation instructions from Python. You have to get, in order to run these notebooks I mentioned earlier, you have to get an OpenAI API key, and yes, this costs money. And then you have to create this key after signing up there and really putting your credit card number there. You have to create this OpenAI API key, and you can, for example, in Windows, put it in your system environment variables. There's also links how to do this on a Mac or how to do this on Linux. And then afterwards you can download the notebooks I was showing you. So for example, you can reproduce the text I was generating at the very beginning, the German translation of the Christmas song. So you can execute this notebook and you can play with it and can enter different prompts and see what ChatGPT will do in a notebook, not in the online form. You can also use BioBob, the tool I showed you, which supports you in biological image analysis. You just install it and download the notebooks as well. And you will also see, I presume, in particular when multiple of you are doing it together in one room, you will also see that the results are varying. And it's quite fascinating. You asked for the same thing and there's different results coming out. So how reliable is this technology actually? Again, active research field, very fascinating. With that, I would like to thank a lot of communities I'm part of. I would like to thank the funding agencies paying my research in the recent years and in the future, I guess. And I would like to thank my team in Dresden, which basically allowed me to make these slides and then before I moved to Leipzig. And I thank you for your attention.